Hi, everyone, especially the ones who joined on time. Let's give the others just a few minutes before we start.
Hi.
Okay, I think we can get started. Um, Let me just share my screen. So, welcome everybody. This is Gateway API Inference Extension Community Call. Today is September 25, and we are a CNCF project, so please be respectful and kind for one another. And the meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded later to YouTube. So with that said, I think we can get started. The first item in the agenda today is to review the items from previous meeting. Let's see, verify the recording is set. I have pressed the record to cloud. Let's see if we can find the recording from last week. I'm not sure we have most of the meetings.
Yeah, sorry, I'm
I
just
think,
joining late, but if we're running into trouble with meetings not being uploaded, it is just at or message YouTube admins alias on Kubernetes Slack. There's some manual work they need to do to approve each upload before it goes live. There's no automation. Well, there's some automation, but it's not fully automated.
yeah, I think there's also an issue with the fact that it's even if it's uploaded, it's going to serving working group, and none of us has permissions there. Like we're not admins or owners of that working group, none of us, which might be related issue. I don't know. Maybe if any of us would be there, we might have permissions to push it to YouTube ourselves. Is it possible, or I'm not sure how it
I
works?
don't think I don't know. I don't know how Kubernetes admin works, but my understanding is that there's a very specific group of admins that have access, and that's where everything needs to go through.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, but I remember something from Yuan Tang, who said something with the fact that he has to go to the cloud account and just press manually on the upload button. Not sure exactly
Oh,
how it works. Yeah.
wait, is that for LLMD or is that for?
No. Yuan Tang is one of the owners of the serving working group.
Yeah, he's a chair.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
interesting. Yeah, I
wonder.
mean,
Go ahead,
yeah,
Rob.
the SIG chairs I know don't have YouTube admin access, but maybe I don't know. Cool if it works for
Maybe
him.
I'm imagining, I don't know, maybe it was too
No,
too far
I believe it.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know exactly, not sure about it, but we can ping him again. I do remember we tagged him in an issue with the video uploading, and he was the one who gave us the instruction to make sure we press on the record to cloud. But then once it's in the cloud account, someone should press on the button to upload it manually from the cloud account to YouTube. Yeah, anyway, let's take an
But
action
if someone
item.
want to take an AI in that AI
Yeah,
section, on
sure,
that AI, to
sure.
just make sure that the upload button is clicked.
Yeah. Um,
And Rob, I think
Yeah,
you said the handle's YouTube admins in case we can't get a hold of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, YouTube dash admins. Yeah.
I wonder if working group serving would give us the maintainer's privileges to be able to go press this button, so they don't have to worry about it.
yeah, I'm not sure about it, but let's try. Let's try to ping them first, see what is the response, and let's continue from there. Anyway, so I've added this action item. I'll update next time. Okay, Kellen, your hand was up. You want to say something, or?
Just about that, the
Okay,
YouTube stuff.
yeah. Okay, so we can move to the next topic, the first real topic. Daniel, it's yours.
Cool, thanks, Nir. And this is a follow-up from last week's conversation on multi-cluster inference pool. Had a lot of good discussion during the community meeting, took a big chunk of time, and I'm hoping that today's discussion should be a little more streamlined. We went ahead and took feedback from the last call. I implemented that feedback in the proposal, and I think it's in a good place now that we could bring it to the finish line. With that said, I wanted to just take a few moments and highlight the changes from last week. So it might be better if I just want to, if I share, send a
Yeah,
request.
sure.
Multiple presenters can share.
So I'll stop
Interesting.
sharing and
Okay,
you
yeah,
can, yeah, just take over.
thanks. Cool. Can everyone see my desktop okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's get into, so really quick, I think everyone that's been involved in the project knows that this proposal has been on the table for some time now. Obviously, a lot of discussion going on here, a lot of iterations to it. And I just, again, want to take a moment to jump into the specific areas that we have updated since last week's discussion. Summary, everything is essentially still the same here. We've already discussed the routing modes that implementations should support one or the other. This area, sync topology, has been added. There's a lot of discussion where Previously, the proposal got into specifics around this hub spoke architecture. And now the proposal highlights essentially two different sync topologies, and that an implementation must support at least one of these. Workflow really hasn't necessarily changed here, other than if you're really dialed into the proposal, you're going to see that this previously showed status clusters and now it's status controllers, and we'll highlight the reason for that. Again, we already discussed the naming for inference pool import, where we're going to use the namespace name sameness of the exported inference pool. Inference pool selection is implementation specific. That hasn't changed at all. The API changes here. We're still talking about annotating an inference pool to export that inference pool. And there's some subtle changes here with inference pool status, right? So one of the first areas we're talking about is adding a field called controller name to inference pool status. And this is actually not multi-cluster inference pool specific. And this will allow the differentiation of managing controllers, right? So we know that there could be different controllers, implementations, controllers that manage inference pool and use status as part of that management. And to avoid clobbering one another, adding controller name to status, and the example go type details this field. I think we potentially talked about this, but just to illustrate it in more detail, is adding an additional parent condition to inference pool status. This is instead of us at this time supporting an export resource, right? There's kind of two pieces to the existing inference pool resource that we need to use. So we have the annotation that the user adds to say, I want to export this inference pool, and then a controller that would provide some kind of feedback loop to the user. And that's through a parent condition, where a parent, right, a managing controller that supports multi-cluster inference pool would then set this parent status condition. We talked already about adding the inference pool import resource. I don't believe really anything of this has changed. Neither the controller responsibilities, again, just minor update where we'll talk a little bit more in detail that the structure of inference pool import status has changed slightly. And the example here hasn't necessarily changed, and that is because the example doesn't reflect inference pool status, just spec. If it did reflect status, it would show things like the exported true status condition for the parent that manages the inference pool. Same here with the importing cluster, and actually I take that back, right? So this is where I kind of extrapolate the changes to inference pool import status, where you see each managing controller. And what's interesting with the managing controller that you see here is we've got different controllers, right? So we've got a controller that's responsible for taking that exported inference pool and creating this inference pool import resource in the importing clusters. But then there's also a parent or a controller, right? There's a controller within that local cluster that now manages the second part of it, right? So the first part, a controller that takes the exported inference pool, creates the inference pool import in the importing clusters. And then a user then wants to go ahead and say, okay, I want to use this inference pool import as a backend reference for my HTTP route, right? Very similar to what we do today, but instead of using the inference pool as a backend, we're now using the inference pool import. And when that's done, we want to be able to surface conditions back to the user to say, okay, here's the managing controller, right? And it's been accepted. So now the user knows, hey, I should be able to start routing traffic to the inference pool, the inference pools that make up this inference pool import, right? And here you kind of, again, see what I just discussed there. Here's the Go types. Again, what's changed here is we've got a list of controllers. And because we have different controller types, right? I said there's a controller that handles the multi-cluster aspects, taking an exported inference pool and creating the inference pool import in the clusters, and then a controller, kind of our standard inference gateway controller, that then looks and sees that the inference pool import is a backend for an HTTP route, and then wires up the data plane for the inference pool import. Here we have a controller name again, because we have different controllers, and so we want to be able to differentiate those controllers by name. We surface the list of clusters that export it, right? So in the example, we've got cluster A and B, and I think it's cluster B that exports the inference pool. So there's only one cluster in this list. And then if additional clusters said, hey, let's annotate the inference pool, again, it would have to be the same namespace and name for the inference pool. Let's export those as well by annotating them. Those would also be surfaced in this list of exporting clusters. And then the parents, if and when the inference pool import is referenced as a backend ref for an HTTP route, those gateways for that HTTP route become parents. And again, that's very similar to what we're doing with inference pool today. Controller name, we've already discussed that, exporting clusters, and that's essentially it. Failure mode, this hasn't changed, right? It's independent of multi-cluster EPP selection. That's going to be implementation specific. The alternatives haven't changed at all as well. I think from last week, I was able to get rid of a lot of these open questions. There's still a few, but nothing that should be a blocker for the proposal. So with that, I think I provided an overview of where we're at, and I'll open it up for discussion.
Yeah, actually, I have more than one question. So at the beginning, I was reviewing that proposal, but with the holidays and everything, I didn't have much time to come back and review it again. But I'll try to touch a few points that I think might be helpful. So first, I've seen the hub and spoke point with the push versus pull. So have you considered, I'm sure you've discussed that in the proposal itself, but have you considered like working with some cluster, multi-cluster project from CNCF, like open cluster management, and then you can do things like in one click, you can distribute resources to multiple clusters at once. So there's multiple APIs defined by the multi-cluster SIG. There's the work API and the cluster API. And if we reuse these APIs, we can do things more easily. I'm not sure if you plan to use it, but let's take, for example, you want to deploy the same resource on, I don't know, 20 clusters. So with one click using the work API, you can just deploy it to the hub cluster, and then it will get distributed to all the spoke clusters. So this is one point. The second point, I'm not sure I got it. I got your intention maybe, but I heard something about adding controller name to to the status field to understand who is managing the inference pool. So there is a dedicated field for that in metadata, right? There is the managed fields. Have you considered using that, or is it not possible because it's multi-cluster, or not sure exactly what have I missed? And then the last question, this is the biggest one, what are the changes you think this proposal might include to the current code of EPP? So there are few options, I guess. One is to implement it as a layer above, and the other one is to implement things internally.
So thanks, Nir, for the feedback and questions. Let me start off with number 3 first, since I think that's just going to be the quickest, right? The proposal is really focusing on implementing multi-cluster at the inference gateway layer instead of the EPP layer. So the EPP should be no changes to the EPP code. And that's not to say maybe at some future point that someone comes along and says, hey, you know, I see this differently, and we kind of iterate on this. But where we're at right now, the focus is on the IG layer or inference gateway layer. So we don't expect any changes to EPP. Obviously, there's a slight difference in status of inference pool. I mentioned controller name. So if we proceed with that, my understanding today, EPP is not touching inference pool status, so I wouldn't expect that to affect any of the EPP functionality. Question number 1, kind of integrating with existing multi-cluster tools. So I believe it's Ryan Zhang, who's a multi-cluster, who was joined last week. I'm not sure if he's here. If so, Ryan, feel free to speak up. And from conversations with him and others that have been commenting on the proposal, we essentially kind of boiled, right, instead of saying, oh, let's use a particular multi-cluster tool or API, again, kind of getting back to trying to not get too specific with implementation details or really avoid them, and kind of just use the sync topology as kind of like a well-lit pattern in LLMD terms, right? To say, hey, implementations, here's 2 different patterns that we see out in the world for multi-cluster, and essentially supporting one of those patterns, right? And as opposed to really kind of diving in at this point with certain APIs from certain projects. And from talking with Ryan, I believe 1 or 2 of the projects you mentioned really follow this push-pull pattern. And until this latest iteration of the proposal, there was a lot of language just about hub and spoke. And so we just wanted to highlight that there's 2 different patterns, and implementation needs to support one of these. And then for 2, controller name versus managed fields. Rob, I think you're on the call. Why don't I let you, if you don't mind, talk more about that?
Yeah. So this was, I think, my idea. But basically, one of the things, and sorry if it was someone else's, but one of the things that I would say that is unique about this variation of multi-cluster API or capability is that it is likely that multiple implementations are going to be handling this. Like that, just imagine for a second that you have a cluster that is part of, well, I'll use terms I'm familiar with. It's part of a mesh. So let's say it's part of Istio and it's part of a GK fleet, for example, right? Those are 2 different multi-cluster concepts. And so in GK, you might, exporting may mean I'm exporting to the rest of the fleet, where in Istio, it may mean I'm exporting to the rest of the mesh. Both of those controllers are going to want to create, inference pool imports. And so this means that in that case, you need both of them to be able to play nicely together. And the way we've resolved that in other cases in Gateway API before is to basically put controller name in status. And that kind of gives a clear signal that, this is my area to populate. This is my area to own in status. Nir, I think you're right in a sense of like managed fields could help somewhat here, but I don't think they help completely. So I think you need, I think that controller name is still a very useful concept as a means of controllers coordinating with themselves, like with other controllers operating on the same resource. And it is, I think, also helpful to end users that are trying to understand what's happening. So that was the rationale.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's more than one way to solve the same thing, especially in Kubernetes and in CRDs where we can define whatever field we want. So I'm sure controller name in status will solve it. I was just asking like to understand if there's a problem like using the managed field, because I think so ideally in every proposal we would like to reuse the same concepts of Kubernetes wherever it's possible. And if it solves some of the things, we might want to reuse it here as well. And also about the sync topology. So if I read correctly, it was something about distribution of resources to clusters, right? That was the intention there. So basically,
how do you take that inference pool that's being exported and distribute the inference pool import resource across the cluster set and manage that resource?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I get the full details of everything, but I really think so it's not, when I was proposing like working with some multi-cluster project from CNCF, it's not that it is implementation specific. It's not. I was trying to point you to like working with multi-cluster APIs. And if you work with the APIs, you can say any tool that is compliant with the API will work with Inference Pool as a multi-cluster solution. So I put it in the chat, for example, the work API that is touching specifically the hub and spoke architecture, and it works in a pool mode. So basically, there is a dedicated namespace in the hub for each of the edge clusters. And then when the hub wants to distribute resources to the spoke clusters, it just puts, it's called work API. It puts something that is like a work CRD, which encapsulates multiple resources, whether it's cluster scope resources or namespace scoped resources, everything is in the same manifest. And then whenever the agent on the spoke cluster can pull, it goes to the hub and pulls that resources locally to that cluster. So basically, the idea is to be compliant with some API and not to reinvent like mechanisms for distributions. And then you can say, I don't know, take any project from CNCF that supports multi-cluster APIs like Karmada or Open Cluster Management or any of these, Kubesteller, any of these that supports the APIs, you can plug them and play.
Yeah, I think there's it's worth some further exploration here. My understanding of these APIs, and I could be wrong on them, but my understanding is that they are very focused on, well, work and scheduling and don't really translate as well to networking. You know, in networking, the challenge that I think is most significant is propagating endpoints, health status metrics, etc.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't think these APIs or these projects are trying to solve those problems. I could
You're right.
definitely
You're
correct
right.
me.
Yeah, you're right.
Um,
This is not trying to solve the metrics of the clusters, but there are some integrations to include like metrics collection from the various spoke clusters. I can look for a pointer for that, but there are some integrations for it. We worked in the past with some multi-cluster projects, deeply with open cluster management and also with kubesteller. Karmada, I know, is in a better shape, like it's incubation already.
mhm.
But all of these projects, they have some mechanism to collect metrics from the spoke clusters. So I'm not sure exactly about the details, just mentioning that it's worth looking into it.
Yeah, and for
Okay.
example, like the link that you gave with the work API, that same project, like there's consideration about like the about API. I think my feedback is still consistent in that like we don't want to necessarily settle on any API. I mean, I think even where we're at with talking about the distribution topologies of push pull hub and spoke, we're trying to provide again just kind of a well-lit path, and as it evolves over time to see like, okay, most implementations are settling on X, Y, or Z API, we could then kind of update the proposal. At this point, like in my opinion, it's one of two things: is like we settle on, okay, this level of kind of like guidance, or we step back and we say, hey, very general, like how the distribution happens between clusters is up to the implementation. And again, we crawl, walk, run, we see, okay, this is where most implementations are settling on, and we can go ahead and say, hey, let's provide more guidance because additional implementers are maybe confused or it's taking too long a time. Let's help them out by iterating on the proposal, because based on the first X number of implementations, we see that there's commonality of using a particular API or what have you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Plus one to everything Danian said. I think that we've spent a lot of time going through very tiny details of the API, but if you think about the API we're proposing, it is very tiny. There is one user-facing field annotation, and the rest is basically just like, there's an inference pull import resource, but there's nothing for a user to configure. They can just point at it. And so I'm hoping that this is a substantially small starting point, that we have flexibility to try something else if this doesn't work or evolve, or I think the value of having something that works across clusters justifies trying something relatively quickly, as long as it's non-invasive, this doesn't affect endpoint picker, this doesn't really affect anything else, it just kind of layers on top. That seems worth it to me. But I do agree that longer term we should be trying to find approaches that work across more things, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. No doubt that keeping it small, tiny, it will help you iterate faster.
Yeah, and a good example, right, is Istio. Like I don't think Istio is going to leverage the work API. I mean, they have their own mechanisms, and so again, this is just really the sync topology is really just a well-lit path, right? Support one of these, but again, if we feel like we this is too much information, then I'd really like to just go in the opposite direction and say that the sync, the distribution is really implementation specific. All right. So Nir, I think we covered the 3 questions that you had, and really appreciate all the feedback and discussion. I know we're 36 minutes into the call. Want to see if there was any other people on the call that had any comments. I don't think I see any hands up. Nir, do you?
I do.
Yeah, Shmuel. Shmuel.
Yes.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Shmuel.
I only wanted to point out, I guess, Nir, and you know this quite well, that if you use something like OCM, right? So OCM will send, if you try to send if you add an inference pool to the manifest, you'll get an inference pool at the other end. The same name, the same everything, right? Which is not being done here, by the way. Here, the 2 sides are different objects. One could debate whether, it's a good idea or a bad idea, but that's the spec here anyway. That's what the spec there is here right now.
Yeah, that is by design. One of the things we've seen in other multi-cluster gateway or just multi-cluster networking concepts is that it's fairly common for you to have your networking infrastructure configured in one place and to have your workloads in another place. And so just kind of mirroring inference pool across all clusters, may be not desirable. You may only want a subset of clusters to be contributing workloads to it. I did mean to ask, what was the acronym you were referring to? I couldn't catch what tool you were talking about.
OCM.
OCM.
OCM is Open Cluster Management.
Okay, thanks.
But even in OCM, you control where it goes. You don't say, you have to say where it goes.
Yeah,
It doesn't necessarily go to all the clusters.
So that I think one of the keys that I really want to solve with this API and the current proposal does this is it allows you to put your load balancing proxy infrastructure in one place and have it point to something virtual, in this case, inference pool import, that refers to workloads that are in other clusters. If we're just doing a pure mirroring approach, you kind of need to have local workloads, or you need I guess maybe the other thing that it does, having the presence of inference pool import, is it allows you from a networking perspective to differentiate between whether you want to send requests to the entire, to the local endpoints or to the broader set across the cluster set. Whereas if you did a full mirroring approach, then you'd have to decide one or the other, I think, as a gateway implementation, which may not be desirable. But yeah, anyway, I'm not sure. I may not have really addressed your point there, so sorry if I missed it.
I was going to razz you guys about if maybe this should be more complete, but that would be disrespectful to all the work you did. I think this is great. One question I did have, though, is we don't need this for V1 inference pool, right? Like we should be good to test and iterate in alpha for now, or were we hoping to get it in V1?
I mean, this is basically just an annotation. I think the inference pool import thing would be an alpha API hiding somewhere.
Okay.
And then this is just kind of an annotation that, piles on top of inference pool, but that doesn't require any API changes.
Sweet. Yeah, I think this is great then. I mean, it's much, much better than not having it. So anyways, thank you all to the work here.
Yeah, to Rob's point, and kind of one of the goals of the proposal, try to make it as light as possible, right? Let's this is the crawl stage. Let's, there's a lot of or there's unknowns, right? And until we actually kind of start somewhere and have something that implementations can start developing against, we're going to iterate on this thing, and I think as time goes on, we'll see it evolve quite a bit from here.
Okay, let me just share my screen again. sec. And here it is. So we have here
C. Hi.
C. Yeah, hi C.
I'm from GK Gateway and I work with Rob. So I'm just quick call out here that we're going to create a PR this week to update the inference pool CRD to support multiple ports of at most 8 ports per inference pool. But I also noticed that there's a note added below that seems to be existing work on this, and I need some clarification.
Yeah, Shmuel, do you want to chime in? Shmuel has been working on it, so he can tell.
So I will
about
chime
his
in.
work. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So as I said there, there's an issue open about supporting data parallel, VLM data parallel. And I have code that does this. The code is more than just changing the restriction of the max items from 1 to 8 is not sufficient. You must also change many places in the code that the code assumes that that it knows the port. There's one port that it uses for all pods. This breaks that assumption all over the code. So I have code that does this. It even supports in the case of only one port, it supports. There's a parameter in EPP that it supports a separate metrics port than inference port. If you have only one such thing, then it supports this. My code is written as such that there's actually a new extension point that does the conversion between real pods and the virtual ones. Or it's because under the covers, you take, either, let's say you said your inference pool has 8 ports on it. So for every real pod, we create 8 virtual pods, the ones that the rest of the system understands. Each one gets its own port and its own inference port, and then everything works from there. And what's being held up is the issue in Istio. I believe if you look at last week's meeting notes, it's mentioned. Now, I will point out that Lior Lieberman took a look at this. He answered one of my questions. Part of the problem there is in Istio, they take the inference pool and they make from that a shadow service. They take the code takes all the ports. Once you have more than one port in there, the route gets messed up. Lior claims the port you didn't really need to take all the ports. One port was more than enough. So we could probably do a very quick fix, and then life will be really good, and maybe even it'll work. Okay.
Yeah, I see hands. Daniel, I saw your hand earlier, but
Yeah,
you took it
I
down.
lowered it because Shmuel later kind of answered a question that I had. So thank you.
Okay.
So
Rob,
Lior
I think
Lior pinged you on my Istio issue.
Okay, let me circle back to it, and I didn't see that.
No problem.
Cool. Okay.
So we have Rob.
I think
Go ahead.
if I'm next. So what I'm hearing here is there's no real contention about making this API change, and this is still a relatively new project, trying to find the right process for how we do API changes. This is a relatively tiny one because it's just, loosening validation. Are we fine to just go directly to PR that updates API spec? Do we want some kind of proposal before this? How do we feel about that? The best way to proceed?
My comment.
I think the main question, Rob, is what happens after this change, right? If you lose the validation and then someone goes and create an inference pool with multiple ports, either the code breaks, either the code breaks or
it will fail because there's code in EPP. It also checks how many ports there are in inference pool. My code that I have code does that, remove that check as well.
Yeah, we need to update EPP with the logic that Jamal just mentioned. Basically, if we're gonna loosen it, We need code that treats every endpoint as,
Yeah.
in the number of ports. So Shimon, you
Right.
said you have that logic. Do you want to send it for review?
I tell you what, I will on Sunday, at the end of my work week. So on Sunday, I will create a PR. I'll mark it as work in progress, and we
Okay,
can take it from there.
yeah.
Now,
I mean, you have
I
a
have
PR.
to admit, I will admit that what I did was I simply removed the max item altogether. The main item is still one, but I removed the max item altogether. I could put a max item with 8, which actually makes sense. As a pod can only refer to 8 GPUs.
Just in terms of process, like I guess my point is, if we have an implementation PR up, we can have the API one going in parallel, and then we make sure that those gets released in the same release.
Yeah.
My,
So I think this is really just a question of, are we agreeing that the next release of GIE includes multi-port support?
Yes.
Basically, and I think that's okay.
Do we have also agreement from the gateways? I mean, should we verify, I don't know, K gateway, because Istio is not going to have their next release by November. And then we have K gateway, and Daniel is here, and we have GKE. So I think this should be validated also on the gateway level, right?
Yeah, I got my hand up. So yeah, just wanted to talk on K Gateway behalf. So we do have a tracker issue. I'll find it, throw it here in the agenda just as a reference point. So we have a tracker issue for this, but at this point, no one's assigned. It's not being worked on. But if this is going to go in the next release, then it would definitely be bumped up our list of priorities.
Okay, great. Kellen, your hands is up a lot of
Yeah.
time.
Are we completely out of time? Oh wow. Yeah, Shamil, one question about the extension point. What do you see being the variance in logic? Because my thinking is we just change the pod controller or the pod reconciler.
So the question was, what kind of parallel things we want to support eventually? That was part of the issue. Okay, this supports not just, this extension point gets the inference pool and the pod. It could be that the pod is annotated with stuff and does special things. You could do all sorts of things you'd like. We decided as doing it as an extension point made it easier. And basically, I provided 2 extension points. One, which is the default one. If you don't provide one, you get the default one, which basically mimics the current behavior of 1 port per pod, basically. And the other one supports data parallel, which says for every target port in the inference pool, it creates or you have 1 real pod, and you get, and when you look inside inference, if you look inside EPP, it only has 8 pods instead of 1, for example.
I'm not sure I got that to the end. So
So the scorers, the filters, the pickers, all these things, they look at this set of pods that's part of the
No, agreed. Yeah, but my point, I guess, is your logic is like, to me, the logic. Sorry if there's a lot of noise on my side. Yeah, I see that the mic is going, but sorry, I'll get through this and then I'll deal with the audio. I don't know if we need to create extension points there, because that could just be the logic. You just look at how many ports are configured on the inference pool, and then you would iterate over that with the expectation that each pod should be serving all of those ports.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
but basically just by setting that there is 8 ports, it means that each pod is like virtual 8, like there are 8 servers.
yeah, I think it's eventually what we need is just to treat like a unique endpoint is the tuple of IP and port, and not just IP and then
Right.
extension point.
Right. So what happened here also was there is in the new data layer, there is a pod info struct, which I extended with 2 fields, basically added the inference port and the metrics port. Okay.
Yeah.
And it puts things in there. There was thought that there may be other flavors of data of parallelism, not just data parallel. And why hard code this in? That was part of the thought process here.
I think we want to keep the framework surface as small as possible. If we just create plugin points for everything, I worry that the framework will get highly complex. We need to document it anyway, and so I don't want to make that documentation just this huge wall of text. That's my angle.
Yeah, I tend to agree also. I mean, if we use one port per pod, then it's without DP, right? And if we use multiple, then we use DP. And essentially, if we just use the tuple of IP and port as an identifier, unique identifier of an endpoint, I think it should do the work. And as long as we don't have a requirement for extension point, like something that should be customizable, then yeah, we probably don't need it.
If all we want to be able to support right now is DPS out of the box, then I can do that. I can take out the extension point and no problem. I'll have this together on Sunday. It's not a big deal.
Awesome.
Rob?
Well, I just kind of wanted to go back to C's original question. If she makes a PR to loosen this to 8, and just kind of clarify basically the discussion we had now, that each endpoint is considered distinct by IP port tuple, basically, that sufficient? Seems like we're all roughly on board with that path forward, and that being part of the next release. Also, it probably is obvious at this point, but on GK side, we're doing what we can to try and get the support out, ideally by November or early November, but we'll see what we can do. I don't want to overcommit there, but certainly our goal would be to, provide as quick support as we can to this update.
Yeah. Daniel, your hand?
Yeah, if we're gonna add multiple target ports in the next release, I think there's a dependency of also adding or adding a conformance test or updating an existing conformance test as part of that.
Yeah, I agree.
I was talking with C a little bit about what that might look like, and the idea, I think, is basically just proving that a gateway will follow endpoint picker recommendations to any port, to any port in the inference pool, instead of just, a specific IP. I think that may be all we need there, but
Ready?
interested in what other people, just for, in terms of gateway conformance, not so much.
EPP already passes in IP and port.
I know, but basically, like, for example, if endpoint picker today passed in an IP and port that GK didn't recognize, that wasn't part of its allow list, it wouldn't follow that, basically. So
Okay.
just some basic thing that it does follow the recommendation of EPP, as long as it aligns with endpoint picker, inference pool. Sorry.
We have the as part of the protocol, like there should be a header that gets set with the selected IP and port, right? The actual one.
Yeah, you are touching the next point I was going to raise. So we have that part of the protocol that was added recently, but I don't think any of the gateways implemented it
GKE
yet.
does.
Okay, so only GKE as far as I know, and we need to open an issue tracker to make sure the other gateways support it as well.
Conformance test.
Yeah, and conformance.
Yep.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Daniel.
I just say that's how we get gateway implementations to prioritize the work, right?
Actually, if I recall correctly, it was marked as optional. Maybe I'm misremembering.
No, I don't
Even-
think it was.
Even when we have things marked as optional, we should still do conformance tests and like attach a feature to it so you can claim support for the feature. But yeah.
No, but I think this is a mandatory one. So there was some discussion in the original PR where the original suggestion was to add like a map of key value pairs, and then it was optional, but we decided to go with the mandatory field that the gateways has to support, and then we added only that one. So this is a mandatory requirement, not an optional.
Yep, there is the must right there. The data plane must communicate to the UPP.
Yeah,
Right?
there is no other way to implement the post response like completely with the response without knowing which IP served the request. So for any, I would say any plugin that has a state like caching or I don't know, prefix cache or these kinds of things, KV cache, they have to know which endpoint served the request.
Yep. Yeah, we need to get a conformance test for this.
Yeah, I'll open an issue. I'll make sure if we already have one. If not, I'll open.
Hey, do me a favor if you
Okay.
do that, Nirk, if you can just send it over to me because I'm going to create a K-gateway issue and want to link to it.
Sure, yeah. We're implementing okay. Great. So we're just on time. You got 2 minutes back. So unless anyone has something to say, you can get, oh, it's 1 minute now. You can get 1 minute back. Perfect.
Enjoy that 1 minute.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Thanks all.
Time.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Yeah.
Guys, bye, guys.
Bye.